Actually a breakdown video from the 9/11 joint inquiry. Jay Rockefeller interviews Chris Kojm from the State Department's Bureau and Intelligence Research Department. Steve Bongardt, FBI agent out of New York City, and Tom Wilshire, the CIA's deputy director of the Bin Laden Issue Station.
I've been very, very useful and serve, I think, purposes, and I think that the two co-chairmen of this committee have been extremely careful in making sure that everything was clear, that everybody was secure. I think it's been quite flawless that way. I think all Americans, all government officials, all people who do public service and others who just might be well known or whatever are at risk. And it occurs to me that one of the things that a hearing like this, which is in public, and when I was first confronted with this, I wasn't enthused about the idea of public hearings. On the other hand, I've changed a bit because I think that's one of the ways one educates not only the American people, but frankly the intelligence community as a whole, as well as Senator Graham, Chairman Graham said, our colleagues. And the end process here is really to make it better and more efficient for all of us, so there's less frustration for all of us, that we develop an ability to dialogue with each other, that you're more confident the system is working, which protects and helps you and propels you forward in your work rather than the walls and all the rest of it. So that I'm glad of these hearings, and I congratulate Chairman Graham and Chairman Goss. My two questions are very...
Now here's the issue. When you have public hearings such as this, involving just the intelligence community, that's what the joint inquiry was basically about. The 9/11 Commission was much more expansive. They touched on state and federal agencies. They touched on INS. They touched on the airline industry. So they were much more expansive. They were the preeminent investigative committee regarding the attacks of September 11, 2001. The joint inquiry was much more intricate in their investigation into the intelligence services than, say, the 9/11 Commission. Whereas this was the only commission where they interviewed people of the intelligence community, domestic, not foreign, of course. And so it's only going to be a partial answer. As on top of this, when it comes to matters of national security, it's no longer a public hearing. They have to go to closed door hearings. In other words, it's not admissible to the public. So with the absence of the foreign intelligence that were monitoring the hijackers in the year 2000, 2001, with the issues involving matters of national security being hidden from the public, we are not getting the full picture. And on top of this, what about the information that never made it past the hearing or inquiry? The 9/11 Commission is falsely represented by the 9/11 Truth Movement as saying it's a farce. It's not a farce. It's basically incomplete because not everything was shown, not everything was produced to the 9/11 Commission. And, there's a problem right there, because the State Department wants to fashion it in that it was a simple misunderstanding between the intelligence services, which led to the successes of the Al-Qaeda operatives involved with the planes operation. But I wish it was as nuanced as that, as simple as that, because it's not. What led to those mistakes? Well, where they were intentional in some instances. Why were they, and the investigation into the intentional withholding of information that could have prevented 9/11? Well, they never went any further than that. Only Carl Levin is the only one I know that really was aggressive toward this approach, and he's from the Joint Inquiry. I can't blame all the commissioners and all these inquiries and commissions because not everybody's in on it. They only know what they know. And what they don't know, they don't know. But that doesn't mean that they are, fashioning a plot to misconstrue you. There's a reason why they weren't allowed to look at the Saudi angle or the Israeli angle. There's a reason, because America protects its interests.
Very simple. One is to you, Mr. Kojm, that you talked about I think about a 455% increase in the tip-off database money, and committee added some money for this program for fiscal 2003 in I think the intelligence authorization bill. It doesn't mean it's happened yet. In view of what you told us this morning, does that in fact give you what you need? I mean, if you say 455%, people say, wow. It could, however, in view of what you, Mr. Rollins, just said in terms of, 7,800 or 8,700 people that loose in this country, not necessarily all terrorists, but people that have committed serious crimes. Everything was within a context. And I need to have a sense of satisfaction that if this money is forthcoming, it will be sufficient to your purposes.
Senator, thank you very much for the question. I hope it's not any misimpression that I left, but the nature of the 455%, it really is the increase in our workload since September 11th. Our funding would be as follows: that prior to September 11th, the program was funded at roughly a little over $1 million a year. Obviously,
I've rather reversed the tasks, have I not?
And the funds have increased some, but not proportionate to the work, with the support of
Well, then let's talk about that, because that makes my question much more important.
Funding post 9/11 increased to slightly over $3 million. So it's a significant increase in a tiny program, but it is not sufficient to the workload. At the worker level, we would believe that funding ought to increase several-fold to accomplish the task. Now, our building supports that. The source of funding heretofore has been machine-readable visa fees, and what has happened since September 11th is those fees are going south and have decreased, and the requirements for those funds, because the state is a player in homeland security, particularly with Mexico and Canada, the funding requirements are going north. So this is why our senior leadership has been in contact with the Director of Central Intelligence about a significant increase in resources for what is a national intelligence mission.
So basically, this is about getting the appropriate funding to the appropriate agencies for the appropriate purposes of protecting national security and, of course, protecting the airline industry and stricter security measures for, say, immigration, right? So now you have these federal agencies like TSA, the National Intelligence Service, and all these other FBI, Department of Justice, the Central Intelligence Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, right? All the way up to the Federal Aviation Administration, Immigration Naturalization Services, right? The Director of, National Intelligence Program. So you got all these agencies, right? Diplomatic Security Services, right? All these agencies that basically are now saying, hey, listen, if you want a secure nation, we need more funding. And this is why they have these fiscal years going before the Senate and the House, and they go and ask the committees over there for, a bloated number regarding what's needed. But here's the thing. Before 9/11 even happened, we had enough to where the intelligence services had enough overabundance of information that could have stopped the 9/11 attacks. But, the CIA and the FBI went before these commissions and these, Senate Appropriations Committees and asked for more money because they lacked, funding for, say, counterterrorism. And before 9/11, the main focus was basically China, North Korea, and white collar crime. Specifically, when the Bush administration got in there, their number one was China. So 9/11 was was taking a backseat. Richard Clarke used to brief the president, Clinton, personally at the principals meetings about the dangers of Al Qaeda, and he was right. But when Bush came to power in 2000, Condoleezza Rice, the national security advisor, used to tell Richard Clarke, well, the president will get back to you. No longer was he invited to lead the discussions. It actually went to the director of the DCI, George Tenet, regarding the threats, the threat matrix reports about what's a pertinent threat. Now, they did talk about Al Qaeda in Afghanistan and ways to disable the Taliban through economic sanctions, but it wasn't enough. Nobody wanted to pull the trigger onto the Clinton administration. And now with the Bush administration, it basically was, you know what? Al Qaeda is not really a major threat until it was. And now, after 9/11, you have people like Chris Kojm, who was the deputy director of the 9/11 Commission, basically saying that, we need a 455% increase in budgeting regarding, certain areas of city, state, local, federal, especially federal agencies, because that's who asks for the most. It's all waste spending. In the days after 9/11, terrorism was number one. It was given the top priority. And what happened? The threats of North Korea, the threats of, white collar crimes, La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mafia, well, they took a back seat. Eurasian terrorism, all this took a back seat. So terrorism was now given, funding. If you worked in the counterterrorism division, you're just licking your chops. Now, Thomas Drake, the former senior executive of the NSA, used to say in his discussions that he heard a conversation from, I think it was Maureen Baginski, the director of national intelligence, the NSA signals directorate. She says that 9/11 was a gift to NSA. I think it was Maureen Baginski or somebody else. Excuse me. Don't quote me on that. I'm not too sure. And he said that he overheard a conversation where 9/11 was a gift to NSA because they knew they were getting a blank check. Now imagine saying that in public, offhanded. Let's take advantage of an event, a tragic event. That's what these people are fucking thinking.
With any response?
Yes, I think you can say there's considerable favorable disposition, but to speak beyond that, I really can't, Senator.
Understood. There was some discussion, my final question, Mr. Chairman, there was some discussion not only in Ms. Hill's excellent report this morning, but also amongst the 5 witnesses that are before us, or at least 4 of them, about walls, lack of communication, and this is the essence of everything. I mean, it's the whole concept of so many of our national security agencies have their own campuses, and sometimes when Senator Graham and I are talking, we're talking about going abroad somewhere. Going abroad could be visiting within a 6-mile radius of the United States Capitol, visiting sort of different cultures, different people that speak different languages or don't speak to each other or have bad histories or whatever. And I don't want to overemphasize that, but one, I don't think, unless I missed it, in which case I apologize, but I'll ask it anyway, it involves the NSA. Lots been written about the NSA. Yeah. The NSA is not famous for sharing information, and I'm interested in terms of whether I might ask that of our 2 gentlemen that I'm looking at now. Have you had any problems with that from them, the sharing of critical information?
Now he's saying
before,
Bongardt from the FBI of New York and Tom Wilshire, the deputy director. This is Wilshire over here. This is Steve Bongardt over here. They're being hidden because they're still active in their fields in terrorism.
September 11th.
Steve Bongardt speaking.
Thrown into this whole FISA question was the question of whether or not we could read SIGINT. And what happened was criminal investigators were prevented before 9/11, and again, the only way I can describe it in this short time period is a snowball event, that they could not read any SIGINT because of the fact that some of the information that was being fed to them and that they were utilizing was FISA-derived information. The NSA had decided that all information then, since it's possible that some criminal investigators might read FISA information, that all criminal investigators cannot read any SIGINT whatsoever. So prior to September 11th, besides not being able to talk about the information that we've already talked about here today, no criminal investigator was able to read any SIGINT information. And that was, in my personal opinion, way too high of a wall with regards to that, because that was something that we relied on from a perspective just to kind of point us in the right direction, if you will. Realizing at the same time we knew any criminal investigator 6 months out of Quantico realizes you can never use that information in an affidavit or a subpoena or anything like that at all. And that wall has come down, but there's rumors that it might go back up with regards to SIGINT information, since a lot of it is derived or could be derived from FISA. So that is a part of the problem too, and I think it's a good thing, Senator, that you brought that up, because criminal investigators need to be able to look at that information.
Since I'm not...
Of course, he's talking about, I think, well, partly, and there's got to be a major part of it, is the NSA's wiretapping of bin Laden's satellite phones used by different members of Al-Qaeda, and as well as the Yemen hub owned by a house that was owned by Ahmed al-Hada, an associate of bin Laden, located in Sana'a, Yemen. It's the most surveilled house in the world. CIA knew about it, the NSA knew about it, even the FBI. But it was the NSA who were, listening to the phone calls. And this is 6 years prior to 9/11. We're talking about 1995. Well, I'm sorry, 96 that we know of. Before that, I don't know, but at least from 96 onwards. So 5 years prior to 9/11. So on top of that, you have the CIA, right? They have their own listing based off the coast of Madagascar. But they also have a bug, but the bug is inside the house, so they can only listen to half the phone calls, that which is outgoing, not incoming. They can't hear incoming phone calls. And this is where that famous story where Michael Scheuer, the chief of the Bin Laden issue station, goes to Barbara McNamara. I think she's the deputy director of the NSA or deputy director of signals intelligence, and they have a huge argument. Scheuer says, why don't you give it, we have one half of the cable, why don't you give us the other half? And they didn't want to do that. Now, they didn't want the CIA to ruin their operation or share their operation, but the CIA also did that to the FBI. So it was a lack of sharing data with each other. Now, had they shared data with each other, especially with NSA and CIA, could they have prevented the 9/11 attacks, or would they have? That's the question. With the FBI, most notably, yes. Had they gotten the information from the NSA and CIA, just those two alone, they would have made the arrest of Khalid al-Mihdhar al-Hazmi as soon as they landed at Los Angeles International on January 15th of 2000. But they didn't know that. Now, either they didn't want their operation to be found out by the FBI because the CIA and Saudi intelligence were monitoring both Khalid al-Mihdhar and al-Hazmi. And according to certain people, the CIA was trying to flip them. They failed at that. But, it's armchair quarterbacking because they happened to hijack American Airlines Flight 77 that crashed into the Pentagon. Now, did they know that beforehand? I'm not willing to go there. Could they have gotten the intelligence about, stopping these attacks or, maybe getting on the plane? Maybe, but we don't know because that information is not public. Now, what information is really pertinent about these three agencies? Well, it would be the NSA. Because if they're listening to the phone calls of bin Laden's top lieutenants, if they're listening to the phone calls of bin Laden through the satellite phones, if they're listening to the phone calls of the Al-Qaeda network hub in Yemen, And like I always said, what do you think about they're talking about on those phones? Right? Now, if they're talking about 9/11, if they're talking about the Africa bombings, and they didn't share this information, well, get the NSA is complicit. Maybe the NSA didn't read the information, and they had the information, but they just didn't read it. That's another excuse. We don't know because we don't know what they have or didn't have because it's not public.
Looking at the lights, I don't know whether or not the red light is on.
It is, Senator.
But I had such,
And it has been.
but I had such a good short question. Quite extraordinary.
Because we are compassionate, go ahead.
It really is short, and it's to both of you gentlemen. Is there a general sense in each of you that what happened on 9/11, that whether or not this was a happy or an unhappy event, this open hearing, the fact that so much attention has been focused, the fact that people are talking about communication walls and all kinds of things, which they never, NSA was no such agency for years, and maybe some people are beginning to learn about it. Is there a sense that there's a brighter future out there, or are you the overwhelming factor that one of you used? Does that predominate? Are you looking? Do you think at an improving situation? Do you feel that the Congress and that your superiors and those that you work with are going to be able to do their work better because of the attention post 9/11?
I will basically just say that the comment
By the way, this is Tom Wilshire speaking.
that I hear most often, without having a personal opinion about resources at this point, but the comment I hear most often from working level people on both sides, CIA and FBI, involved directly in the bin Laden business, is one with a panic-stricken look in their eyes, saying, "We're going to miss stuff. We're missing stuff. We are missing stuff. We can't keep up." So I believe that I know that resources are being shifted to meet this, and they continue to be shifted. I know that technology continues to be modified, and sort of the nightmare scenario is that the modifications and the resources won't get there in time. We also understand that we can't do this in 5 minutes. We can't fix it in 5 minutes. But I will tell you right now from the front lines is that the feeling is one that there's just too much information still to handle and not enough people to do it.
Some foreboding.
Yes. I would say most field agents are still frustrated. They realize we've come, with regards to the FISA issues that we've discussed with the wall being set down, that we've come a long way. But we also realize with the magnitude of what happened September 11th, in trying to prevent that in the future, we need to go further. We need to make sure that all the walls that we talked about here today continue to come down, and that when information is compartmentalized, that somebody's accountable for that, why that reason is, to all agencies, not just the FBI or CIA or anything. So we have some sense that we've made some progress, but Senator, my estimation, just from being where I am, is that we need to continue that and go a lot further.
Yeah, and that's the problem that the intelligence services have. According to them, it's just too much information and lack of manpower. But here's what happened before 9/11. Even though they had a lack of manpower for counterterrorism, as they say, they had enough information that they could have prevented the East Africa bombings of 1998 and, of course, the 1993 World Trade Center bombing as well. They also had enough information to stop the 9/11 attacks. Now, this is not me speaking. This is the people that were intricately involved with the intelligence services have come out over the years and have said. And for one reason or another, whether they had the information or just didn't read it, whether they had the information, didn't share it, or they had the information, read the information, didn't want to stop it. Now, that's taken it a bit too far because we don't have that information, right? Well, who would? The people that were directly involved in monitoring the people physically, right there. And especially if they're doing signals intelligence, listening to phone calls, reading emails, human interaction, human intelligence, human signals intelligence, SIGINT, right? Those are actively involved in either one. Well, now here we are, post 9/11, and all the intelligence services are getting bloated and fatter, and they're still complaining about a lack of funding in these areas. To keep our nation safe, we need more money to expand our powers and to degrade the civil liberties of everyday Americans to keep us safe from terrorism. Well, it ain't the terrorists who are basically taking our rights away and asking for billions of dollars. And all right, that's the end of this video. Guys, have a good day. See you in the next video. Take care, everybody.